Do you believe in aliens? The Bigfoot? The Mapinguari? On this episode of Global Guardians, I'm joined by my good friend Pat Spain, a real-life cryptozoologist. He approaches the world of cryptids and mythological creatures with a scientific eye, but also an open mind and heart. He's traveled the world in search of these bizarre creatures, and as they say, the truth is out there, or potentially in this episode. So make sure to listen.
I've always been drawn to the misunderstood creatures of the world, and like the creepy crawlies and kind of the weirder stuff that people aren't. Like the weirder stuff that people aren't necessarily familiar with. They've either never heard of it or they've heard the wrong things. They've heard that this is super dangerous, but that has always been where my interest drew me, and that brought me into study the deep oceans. So to go to school for marine biology and try to find out everything I could about giant squid and weird stuff like that. And it brought me to cryptozoology, which is, the study of unknown and hidden creatures. And that's what really drew me into all of this stuff.
So, you're a marine biologist by trade.
Well, by schooling. I'm a marine biologist by schooling. I haven't worked in marine bio officially in a very long time.
Okay. However, we did go tide pooling recently because we are currently in California. So I would never expect for us to be doing this podcast in Los Angeles, but here we are, and it's actually very quiet. Really nice day today.
This is gorgeous. This is the best time I have ever had in Los Angeles, and I think that's because I'm with you guys and I got outside a lot.
So we brought Pat here to California to help us with some episodes, in particular a hagfish episode in which we went out on a boat to capture hagfish. What exactly is a hagfish?
So a hagfish is the slimiest animal on Earth.
Okay.
It's a primitive fish-like creature.
Primitive fish-like creature.
Primitive fish-like creature.
That's the term that we have given it.
Yeah. But it's true. It is true. They are unlike really any other species. They're the most closely related to a lamprey, but incredibly distinct. They're a jawless fish. They produce copious amounts of this really, really thick and unusual slime that they use for pretty much to avoid predation. But there's some evidence that they may use it. They use it pretty much to avoid predation.
Yeah, and we saw that firsthand when we worked with a professor from Chapman University, Dr. Fudge.
Dr. Fudge.
And we did this really cool episode, which we'll show you some clips of coyote getting slimed.
Yeah.
And as well, we went out tide pooling. So this was your first time out west tide pooling, right?
Yeah, so this was the first opportunity that I've had to go tide pooling in California. I do it out east all the time. I mean, that is like a normal weekend activity for my kids, actually all year round. I bring them out there in the winter, which makes my wife very nervous, rightly so. But we play it as safe as you can. And that is one of my favorite things to do. So I joke around that I got a degree in marine biology and the only things I use it for are to order fish in Latin and to impress my kids at the tide pools.
I like that. No, tide pooling is super fun. It's like night herping, which for me is what I love to do, which is going out at night looking for nocturnal species of reptiles. But we went out tide pooling in Los Angeles and we found some octopus, some brown sea hares. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, not to toot my own horn or to be, arrogant in any possible way, but there are very few things in tide pools that I haven't seen before. I love every second of it, but it is rarely a new experience. And this was awesome because I found so many species that I've never seen before.
Including your first octopus.
My first octopus, my first wild octopus that I caught, my first wild sea hare. Just so many things that I've read about and that I've wanted to find and I've studied and got the opportunity to.
Yeah, I was actually really stoked for you because I just felt your enthusiasm and you were just genuinely like, as soon as we got there, you just went out and were just like looking, right?
Yeah.
And so I was really happy that you were stoked to find those species. But those species have a lot of things in common. Well, one thing in common, and that is, as you mentioned earlier, they're kind of weird.
Yeah.
They're kind of cryptid.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they're cryptic. They're hidden. They're not something that everyone knows about. Like you think about the population of Los Angeles and how many people know that the largest sea slug on Earth lives feet away from where they go to the beach.
No, they don't know that. I mean, people were out there enjoying the area, but they weren't looking for these giant sea bears.
Right. No, I love it, and that's one of the great things about biology is that we are surrounded by wildlife pretty much everywhere you go. I mean, you've got urban animals that you may find them in the wild, but they look very different. They act very different in urban environments.
Yeah.
And this stuff is all around us. So if you take the time to kind of look for it, you can find some really cool things wherever you are.
Yeah. So let's touch on that cryptid aspect to segue into cryptozoology. So, as a marine biologist by schooling, you are also considered a cryptozoologist?
Yeah, so cryptozoology is a really interesting field of study, I'd say. You don't. I think there might be a place that offers a degree in cryptozoology, but
really,
I think it's not a certification. It's you can take a class. The last I saw, this was a few years ago.
Okay.
But you don't generally major. In fact, I don't think anyone majors in cryptozoology. So when someone calls themselves a cryptozoologist, that's different than saying I'm a marine biologist, I'm a microbiologist, I'm a physicist. Really, cryptozoology, in my mind, is biology with a little bit of folklore and anthropology mixed in.
Okay.
So my major was marine biology, my minor was cultural anthropology. So therefore, I feel justified in calling myself a cryptozoologist.
Okay, and we wore the appropriate shirts.
Yeah,
for
man,
this.
absolutely. I got a little Erie Eric. Erie Eric is a cryptozoology artist who I love from Erie, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, nice. I've got my cryptozoology shirt, which is some of the cryptids around here holding hands.
And the hairy hominid getting in there with the humans.
Yeah.
I love that.
Let's see. Let's test you out. What's this guy?
That's got to be the jackalope.
Jackalope.
Mothman.
Mothman.
That's Nessie.
Nessie. Okay. What's this one?
That's the Jersey Devil.
Oh, what's this guy there?
That's the Flatwoods Monster.
He knows his stuff.
I like cryptozoology. I'm interested in it.
He's officially a cryptozoologist. Yeah, so I really want to focus on cryptozoology because I think when most people that at least somewhat know the term cryptozoology, they might laugh. They might not necessarily really understand that it kind of should be taken as a serious science, right? Or at least something that shouldn't just be laughed at.
Exactly. So I think that people tend to put it in kind of the woo-woo, like paranormal category.
A pseudoscience.
A pseudoscience, exactly. And it's not entirely unwarranted. I understand why people do that because there are the fringe aspects of it. There's, because it's not a really structured discipline, people can use that term in a number of different ways. So there are those in the crypto community who look at, trans-dimensional beings, and they bring in ghosts, and they bring in, the paranormal, and that's fine. Like people have their own interests, people are into things, but cryptozoology in my terms, and the terms that I think of it as, are very much in the Darren Naish and Lauren Coleman school of cryptozoology, which is, it's first and foremost biology. That anytime you're looking for an animal that hasn't been given a Latin name, it's cryptozoology.
Yeah.
Because this is a hidden creature. So my belief and what I've found throughout my life is that indigenous people who live in one region, they know the animals better than most scientists, most biologists, because as a field biologist, you get out there on some collecting trips, but you don't live there day in and day out. So the chances of you seeing a very unusual animal are pretty slim. But people who live there, they get to see this stuff all the time. So why wouldn't we take their stories literally? Why wouldn't we want to know more about this? Why do we discount them? I think it's extremely arrogant and a little bit, ethnocentric to ignore any stories from indigenous peoples.
Because it's human nature, right, to create a story around something that you're describing, right? So to certain indigenous peoples, right, them seeing this species, they're going to instill their beliefs onto it.
Sure.
And so they will describe it and how they perceive it and maybe how it fits into their culture.
Yes, and that's what I found with cryptozoology is that my way of making a distinction is by asking people, is this a physical, real creature, or is this something that exists in the spirit world or in a different realm? And with people all around the world, they will make that distinction. So when I talk with a certain First Nations tribe, they were talking about sea serpents, and it was like, sea serpents are physical, real creatures that we have found. Thunderbirds are spiritual beings.
Sure.
And having that distinction helps me because I'm interested in all of it.
Yeah.
But I'm going to study the physical, real creature and see what the reality is behind this. The spiritual creature, I'm going to leave that up to others.
Yeah, because as a biologist, right, our job is to go out and to hopefully study these physical creatures. Now, I want to read the definition I found of cryptozoology, thanks to ChatGPT here. So, cryptozoology is the study of and search for animals whose existence is not proven or is considered unlikely by mainstream science.
Yeah, that works.
So that sentence right there. Most animals, technically, at some point in time, were cryptid, right?
100%.
They were not discovered.
Yeah.
There were rumors about them.
The mountain gorilla. When the mountain gorilla was first described, people thought that this was a hairy hominid.
Sure.
They thought that this was a legend that was coming out of the indigenous peoples of the region.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Just think about it. If right now everyone knows what a gorilla is, but imagine back when there was no internet, you don't have readily available pictures or zoos. Someone the first explorers to come upon a gorilla, I mean, that's going to look like a big hominid.
Absolutely. And I mean, the classic example is the platypus. Imagine describing a platypus to somebody who has never heard of this, and absolutely does not believe you. You're like, oh, it's a mammal that lays eggs, and it has a super sensitive duckbill, and it's venomous. And it's like, what? What are you talking about? There's no way that's real.
I think there's countless examples of animals whose existence have not been proven, but eventually are proven. I mean, that's what science is. That's what the biology is, right?
Yeah. Okapis.
Okapis.
Okapis are another great one where, it's related to a giraffe. People are like, oh, it's half zebra, half giraffe. And it's like, no, it isn't. And then you see it and you go, oh man, no, it's really there. But you can say it about way more common things too. One of the largest species of, I think it's soft-shell turtle, was discovered in the center of Saigon in Vietnam, like 15 years ago.
Sure.
This is in Saigon.
Recent,
this is in a major metropolitan area. And this giant, enormous turtle species was found there.
So I think what based on this first sentence of this definition, there's more to this. We could start to understand that, okay, the study of unproven or undiscovered species, that's something valid that happens in science all the time.
Absolutely.
Right? So following that is these creatures, often referred to as cryptids. So cryptid meaning camouflage,
hidden,
unseen, hidden, right? Include legendary or folklore-based animals like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and chupacabras, which are kind of featured on my shirt here. Cryptozoology is typically regarded as a pseudoscience because it lacks empirical evidence and relies heavily on anecdotal accounts and folklore rather than scientific methods. As you touched upon, right? Folklore meaning like indigenous cultures and such. Despite this, it has a dedicated following of enthusiasts who investigate sightings and claims of cryptids in hopes of proving their existence.
Yeah, so I look at it as, I would distinguish it from pseudoscience because it's a starting point. It's my whole basis of cryptozoology is you don't immediately write something off because it sounds wild. Because everything sounds wild if you put it in a certain context.
Everything is science.
Everything in science
I would say
sounds
so.
impossible. Imagine describing quantum physics to an 18th century peasant.
Sure.
Or the king. In the 18th century, imagine describing quantum physics. It sounds like magic. It sounds completely outrageous.
It's ridiculous for us to get into a plane and fly.
Correct.
It really, can you really comprehend that? So I agree with you. Everything in science initially is kind of crazy.
Yeah. So my approach is you don't just immediately write something off, and cryptozoology is the starting point to then it's not distinct from biology. It's not to say that it transitions from cryptozoology to biology. I think in the general public's mind, it transitions from cryptozoology to biology once there's either a Latin name given or once there's a less monstrous kind of finding. So the thing that frustrates me the most about cryptozoology is that, going back to the sea serpent example, so if there was a new species of squid found, of a deep sea squid, but it was found to hunt birds, and it's found that, one of its primary food sources are albatross or something, some open ocean kind of large bird species. Therefore, it spends a lot of time at the surface, and it's evolved a hunting tentacle to raise up higher above the surface and to grab those birds out of the air. I would be over the moon excited to find that new species of cephalopod and to read everything I could about it and to want to find out about it, and I would say, sea serpent.
Sure.
We got it. We figured it out. And the general public would go, oh, it's a cool squid. It's not a sea serpent. You're like, but why? Like, same thing with the Yeti. You find a new bear species in the Himalayas, and it's the answer to the Yeti myth. This is a Yeti. But people go, no, it's not a white Bigfoot, therefore it's not the Yeti. And you're like, well, that's not the right thinking. The thinking of it is you don't write it off, but then you follow where the evidence leads you, and you can't have a presupposition on what this animal is. You just follow the stories, and that has served me really well. I've had my eyes completely open to the possibility of new creatures all over the world because I didn't immediately write it off, and I followed where the actual evidence led.
Yeah, that's the practical approach to it.
Yeah.
And you're right. It is just as exciting as saying, well, you found the Yeti.
Yeah.
Right? But
there's a new bear species.
There's a new bear species.
There's a new cephalopod.
Sure.
That's awesome.
Sure. And those cultures that, saw this new bear species, right? The only way they could describe it in their way is to say it was a Yeti or whatever it is.
Yeah. Or hominin-like. It's human-like. It walks more upright than most other bears. Therefore, we're going to have a different descriptor for it. So I had this guy in Sumatra, one of our guides, who I went into this idea of orang pendek in a very admittedly Western mindset, which I was trying not to have, but believing that this was most likely a mistaken identity for either an orangutan or a gibbon. I left not believing that, but the gentleman that we were with said, kind of laughingly, as I was directing him towards maybe this is a gibbon, maybe this is a gibbon, he said, look it, man, the only people who don't believe in orang pendek are the people who don't live in this forest. I was like, fair.
That's valid.
Yeah.
That's a valid point.
Yeah. You got me.
So you've traveled the world searching for some of these cryptid species.
Yeah, so I would make the distinction between looking for them and looking for the significance of them. So I think that it's less an investigation into whether this creature is real or not, and more an investigation into the significance of this animal. Like, what does this mean to the communities that see them, and what's the biology of the area to support something like this, either a real animal or a story. Inadvertently, I did come around to believe that some of these animals are there, but the intention was really just to showcase kind of a unique aspect of this. And in the case of something like, I'll take Mokele mbembe as an example. So Mokele mbembe is a dinosaur-like creature, a sauropod-like creature seen in the in the swamps of West Africa. I do not believe that there is a dinosaur-like creature. I did not find any evidence of a dinosaur-like creature, but I found the need for the stories of a dinosaur-like creature in the swamps of West Africa.
Gotcha.
There's the pygmy tribes there have a culture that rewards strength and bravery above all else, but they live in an extremely dangerous environment. And if you are looked at as weak, if you are looked at as hesitant, then you lose status in there, and you lose respect, and you lose livelihood, and you lose the ability to be an upstanding member of the group. So if you say, I don't want to go down to the river at night because there are crocodiles, people will, write you off, and you're a wimp. You are not respected. You are, maybe you can't be a fisherman anymore. But if you say, I don't want to go down to the river at night because Mokele mbembe was spotted there, the whole culture goes, yeah, that's a smart move.
Gotcha.
You're a smart person. So we need this out. You need like a culturally significant out, and Mokele Mbembe fulfills that niche.
That's an interesting approach from your perspective, right? You're not going out there necessarily to physically find the species, but I like that, the significance of that story. I mean, for Western culture, we have plenty of stories, right, that we kind of tell ourselves, and that potentially people in other countries might look at as crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. You need a car.
Yeah.
No one needs a car, but we tell ourselves that we do, and we justify a lot of things in order to have a car because we have convinced ourselves that we need this. It is a culturally significant myth.
So when you think of something to be like, what is real and what is not, I think if that culture thinks this cryptid is real, I mean, then it's real to them.
It is.
Who are we to say it's not? I mean, just because there may not be a physical, biological aspect to it, it's real in their mind.
Yeah, you start to get into the realm of how significant spirituality is to different people and how significant the stories of the paranormal are to people, and you really get into it is real to me, therefore it is real.
Sure.
And it's really hard to there's no valid argument really to.
And that's why I wanted to have this discussion with you about cryptozoology, because I do think most people see it as a joke, see it as a pseudoscience, but you are once again approaching it from your biology background, from a science background. And so I've got your book here, A Bulletproof Ground Sloth on the Hunt in Brazil, or How I Lost My Mind, Was Dyed Blue, and I Accidentally Learned How to Smuggle Weapons. It's one of Pat's many books in a series of books, which we'll talk about later on. But I just want to read this one little sentence here. This was written by your buddy Harry Marshall.
Yeah.
Pat Spain is that rare thing, a rationalist who still embraces the possible and knows that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of. I love that.
Thank you.
Because you are approaching cryptozoology in exactly that manner, right? Science is about discovery, right? At some point, there have been many scientists out there that have been thought of as crazy, that they were just dreamers, right?
All the best.
All the best.
All the best scientists.
All the best. So I would like for listeners to potentially start thinking of cryptozoology in a little bit of a more meaningful manner, right? Approach it from a scientific perspective. Now, with that said, there are the Bigfoots out there.
Sure.
Right? There are the Loch Ness Monsters. There are all these cryptids here, right?
Yeah.
That also start to make it kind of fun, but you start to cross a bit of a line.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The way that I look at it is question everything, but at some point that questioning starts to become counterproductive. So where that line is different for everybody. But if we continue to question proven science or things that we absolutely know to be a fact, where we can do that to our own detriment. So with cryptozoology, I think as cool as the story of the Loch Ness Monster is, and as interesting as it is, and as beautiful as the loch is, having spent some time there, it's gorgeous, it's well worth the trip. And it's worth looking out, to see if maybe you catch a sighting of something interesting. But the Loch Ness Monster is not there.
Gotcha.
So putting resources into that particular, investigation, those resources could be diverted into other things. But there are a lot of other creatures out there where that question still exists, where that has not been put to bed. And again, my line for the Loch Ness Monster is going to be different than it is for other people. And if given the opportunity to get out on the loch and go on a Loch Ness Monster hunt, I'm still going to do it. Because no matter what, getting outside and doing some kind of investigation into whatever it is, you don't know what you're going to find. You may find something cool and unique. You're looking for the Loch Ness Monster, but you find a new species of eel. So you do some eDNA work in the loch. I know in the back of my head I'm not going to find the Loch Ness Monster, but maybe I find some new commercially relevant species of salmon, or I find some new behavior of one of the known animals in there that we weren't aware of before. So cryptozoology can really push science forward. I was able to do what we believe is the first ever CAT scan on an oarfish as part of a cryptozoological investigation. That moved science forward. People wrote their PhD theses on that scan that I was able to do of an oarfish. Now, I was doing it for a cryptozoology program, but it moves the science forward.
Sure, so inadvertently, through cryptozoology and trying to search for Loch Ness Monster or other cryptids, I mean, discoveries can be made that still are going to benefit science one way or another. So in other ways, in other words, just got to get out there.
Yeah, you want to go out on a Bigfoot hunt?
There.
Do it.
Yeah.
100%. Go out on a Bigfoot hunt. Bring your kids. If your kids aren't necessarily in love with camping and don't want to, you can get them excited by telling them the myths of Bigfoot, the story of Bigfoot. And hey, maybe we'll see this hairy hominid if we go up to the Olympic, National Park. There's all these great stories and there's all these great legends, and you tell kids that and they get super pumped. Then you get them out there and maybe you find a giant Pacific salamander. Maybe you see just the awe and majesty of the redwood forest, and that sparks a love of nature in them.
So I think there's a purpose for that. So, getting into Bigfoot, probably the most famous of the cryptids. So already, Loch Ness Monster, Pat, you're not a believer, right? Currently.
Correct.
Right? But Bigfoot, right? He's big in imaginations.
He is.
Right?
He is.
Let's first describe what is considered a Bigfoot in terms of the definition of a Bigfoot and where Bigfoots are distributed geographically.
So I can tell your scientific mind by starting with the definition of Bigfoot, because that is so critical in cryptozoology, and it is the thing that is more often than not overlooked. I will answer the question, I promise, but it just sparks in me the Kraken. So when I say the Kraken, what do you think of?
A mythological, like a sea creature.
Sure. Describe it.
I think like a big, like octopus-like creature.
Absolutely. So giant octopus that sinks boats, giant squid that sinks boats. The general line is, well, we found the Kraken, it's a giant squid. When you go back and actually read the original stories of the Kraken, it's a living island.
Oh.
So people take and combine all of these different myths into making it this one creature that then gets into the public perception. We do the same thing with the Loch Ness Monster. Some of the original stories of people are like, oh, the Loch Ness Monster has been spotted since the 1700s. The animals that were described in the 1700s were probably deer. They were described miles inland from the loch.
Gotcha.
And the ones that were in the loch aren't any of the descriptions of what we think of as the Loch Ness Monster today. So if we tried to define what Bigfoot is, there are so many different descriptions. There's the spiritual Bigfoot. There's the First Nations tribes in Canada who believe that a Bigfoot is a member of the tribe who disobeyed and disrespected nature and disrespected their tribe and went against them. And because of that, their spirit has been turned inside out and they are now returned to nature as a wild being, isolated from their people.
Interesting.
So that's one story, and people go, oh, well, the First Nations believe in Bigfoot. They do, but it's not the same thing as and this is only one particular group of First Nations tribe. There are hundreds of other tribes, and some of them, to some other tribes, it's a hairy hominid. To some people, Bigfoot is a primate, is a more ape-like creature. So really, when we go around the world, I prefer, rather than talking about Bigfoot, because Bigfoot, I do believe, is a uniquely North American experience, and I would argue Pacific Northwest experience. But hairy hominids, as a collective, are cited or at least stories of them, from all over the world. And they're everything from the smallest, an orangutan-like, little 3-foot being, all the way up to these massive 12-foot gargantuan giants that people describe. And everything gets kind of lumped together and talked about like, oh, well, there's Bigfoot in Florida. We call it swamp ape.
Yeah, swamp ape. Yeah. The skunk ape.
Skunk ape. Skunk ape. Thank you. Yeah. So there's Bigfoot in Florida, and we call it skunk ape. But the Bigfoot that's described in Florida is very, very different than the Bigfoot that's described in the Pacific Northwest. So which one are we talking about? So if we give my definition of Bigfoot, it's a 6 to 8 foot tall, hairy hominid in the Pacific Northwest of the United States.
Gotcha.
I am not a believer that it's there, but I am also not convinced that it isn't. I would not be surprised in one way or the other. If we find it or if we don't, I think that every year that passes without more definitive evidence is, unfortunately, it makes it less and less likely. But there are some researchers like Dr. Jeff Meldrum and Cliff Barackman, who I really respect, and who they do some great work, and they are in the camp of believers. I can't discount that, but personally, what I have looked into, I have not been compelled by the existing evidence.
Gotcha.
But I don't think it's impossible. I think we could be talking about a very small population that's primarily nocturnal, potentially migratory in a very limited sense in some really remote areas. There are very, very remote areas of the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I agree with your definition and description of what you think a Bigfoot is, right? I think people here in the U.S. would agree with that. Yeah, I think Harry and the Hendersons.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If you ever seen that movie, Harry and the Hendersons,
love
that's
it,
my favorite
course,
Bigfoot movie. But what intrigues me is the fact, as you mentioned, that there are other cultures around the world that have their version of a Bigfoot, and so
Absolutely.
there becomes a commonality. So that to me is the little intriguing aspect to be like, is this human nature that we do want to seek out a human-like animal that might be superior to us, bigger, scarier than us, potentially? But coming back to the U.S., for example, I, for one, would say there's no intriguing evidence for me to believe in Bigfoot. Up here, I don't believe. But in here, I want to believe.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fun aspect of cryptids like Bigfoot. Now, what do I think people are seeing? Because clearly, people do see something out there that concerns them. And in my opinion, it's probably bears. We do have I look at where Bigfoot sightings occurred throughout the U.S. and, well, there's large mammal species out there, and those are bears. A bear that stands up looks very intimidating.
Yeah.
I also believe that many people go out into nature a little apprehensive, right? They may not really understand the certain species that are out there. They might be a little scared or have a heightened sense of awareness, especially at night or certain hours. It's very easy for shadows to play tricks on people that might be a little apprehensive being out in nature. And thus, you could be like, look at that shadow, this is going to eat me or kill me, and you get scared.
Yeah.
So I do think Bigfoot, the legend of Bigfoot stems from potentially some of those situations.
So there is a known phenomena called paraploidia, where we as humans have evolved and are pre-programmed to see faces where there are no faces. We get so much information from someone's face as you're having a conversation. The majority of the messages that you're getting are actually from their expressions and their tone of the voice, rather than from the words that someone is saying. So this is so important to us as a species that we actually go over the top with it, and we start seeing faces in bricks and in leaves and in cars, and you think this car looks happy because of the way that the front of the grill looks, that kind of thing. So seeing faces in the trees is a quite literal phenomenon that we have evolved and we are pre-programmed to do.
Fascinating. That makes a lot of sense. And added to that, the, once again, heightened sense of awareness when someone is out in the woods, especially by yourself.
Yes.
I mean, you have spent lots of time out in the field, so have I. We are educated about what is around us in the field, but you could probably say that there's been moments that you feel a little creeped out.
For sure.
A little nervous, a little scared. And that can certainly lead someone, especially that's not trained with the animals, knowing what species are out there, to once again, see something that may not be there.
For sure.
But in their mind, once again, it is real.
So we know as Homo sapiens that we evolved alongside a number of other species of human-like animals, of hominids.
Yeah,
so,
of species indigenous of Homo.
Correct. Yeah, we
Right?
had Neanderthals, we had Homo ergaster, we had a whole, potentially there was up to, the science changes all the time, so I won't even try to say the numbers, but there were a large number of human species on the Earth at one time at different points throughout history, to the point where some of them even interbred.
Yeah, but let's just let that sink in. There was other human species in this world. So let's think about it. You think of tigers and lions, you think of, polar bears, grizzly bears. Those are different species of bears, different species of big cats. Other species of humans that potentially had the same cognitive abilities as us.
Or more advanced,
Or more
in the case of
advanced.
Neanderthals.
That's kind of weird to think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you could see where that would be a monster. This would be a monster in early humans' mind. So some of the earliest stories that we have, think of Beowulf. The big bad in Beowulf is Grendel, which is essentially a hominid. So we have, there's a lot of debate of, is this an ingrained memory? Is this a cultural memory that we have of these other hominin species, and have we actually evolved to have a fear of them the way that we have of snakes? You can show a child pictures of different animals and gauge their facial responses, and infants have an innate fear of snakes, of anything that's shaped. Do we have the same thing for that point of it's human but it's not quite? There's a term for it in AI space where you see something and it's like just that off-puttingness. Is that an innate monster that we've evolved to be afraid of, or do we have cultural memories of truly interacting with these? Do we have stories from great grandparents who saw these, primate-like creatures, or are they still there? That, to me, is the most fascinating aspect of cryptozoology.
I agree. Yeah. You touching upon that aspect of we as humans being another species, I have to emphasize that because sometimes we don't see ourselves as part of the environment, but we are another species that interacted and still do with other species in the environment
Every day.
Some of which are superior to us in that they can kill us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
for
so
sure.
for a baby, for an infant, or they did those studies on baby monkeys that had never been in the wild, primates, show them a snake and they're terrified.
Yeah.
Right? How is that possible? That's an innate instinct. So I believe potentially, right, we could see a fear of another human-like animal that is superior to us, and so that puts us a little gets us a little uneasy.
Yeah, some of my favorite sightings of hominins from around the world are the ones, the description of them is an absolutely overwhelming just sense of emotion. So this one sighting in particular has always stood out to me in Sumatra, where somebody saw orang pendek. They did not believe in orang pendek before this. They had studied orangutans and gibbons. They had worked with a ton of primates. They're a photographer actually and biologist, and just extremely well versed in all of this wildlife. And they said when they saw orang pendek, they started crying. They were so overwhelmed with emotion at just the similarity and yet otherness of this creature. They said that it was a completely overwhelming sense of emotion. And I've heard that from other people who are describing other hairy hominids from around the world. We talk about the American soldiers who were stationed in Vietnam during the Vietnam War when they saw rock apes. And it's the same kind of thing, this overwhelming sense of emotion. And you hear this with the Yeren in China. You hear this with, there's a couple other ones in Africa and in all over the world.
How many Bigfoot-like creatures do you think exist in culture in terms of by name? So you're naming a few of them already. Name a few of those. You said, what's it, a Yeren?
Yeren.
And a rock ape?
Rock ape in Vietnam, the Sasquatch, the skunk ape, the orang pendek, or there's another orang something in Sumatra. There are dozens of them. And actually, Lauren Coleman has a book on this that's all about hairy hominids around the world. And he is excellent at describing in detail all of the different traits of them.
So to me, like, the myth of and lore of a hairy hominid in Asia makes a little bit more sense to me because, well, I mean, look at a male orangutan.
Sure.
They are as bizarre looking as can be. You know, they're giants.
Yeah, and especially when they get too large to climb and they exist completely on the ground. They are
an early explorer seeing that will be, that would blow your mind.
Yeah,
I mean, that is an intimidating animal that has human-like features because it is a great ape.
Very much so. And the locals in some of the regions where orangutans live, they consider them human. They do.
The people of the forest.
The people of the forest,
right.
Correct. That's
a person of the forest, right?
Orangutan, that's what that means, yeah. Mm-hmm. So they do consider them people. They consider them different than us, but they consider them people. They don't consider them animals. And this is the really, really interesting thing that I found in Indonesia, is that every native person in Indonesia has black hair. So if you are, I mean, of course there are going to be exceptions, but the vast majority, but if you describe anything as having hair, it's black.
Okay.
Fur can be a number of different colors. And when they are describing orang pendek or orangutans, they will say black. Like, what color were they? They were black. But then if you show them a color chart, they'll point at red or at blonde or at other things. But it's the distinction of hair. Hair can only be black.
Wow.
Fur can be multiple colors.
Interesting.
So with the idea of just writing off things that seem bizarre, and cryptozoology allowing us to not do that, to be the person who just entertains the possibility of something. I do think that that's somewhat in my genes. My great uncle was Charles Fort. Charles Fort is a paranormal, one of the first paranormal researchers, the godfather of cryptozoology and of paranormal research. And that was his entire basis. The entire basis for his writings was to poke his thumb at the nose of science. We can't discount something just because it sounds strange. And because of that, he was the first person to document ball lightning and raining fish and raining frogs, which are real phenomena. He created the term teleportation. That's a term that he actually invented.
Amazing.
So
it's in your genes.
It's in my genes. It's in my blood. And I actually got into this stuff before I even knew that I was related to him.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show, things that we don't understand, right? You can't discount them because, well, once again, science is all about what we don't understand and working to the point where we have the best explanation for that.
Yeah, and it sounds bizarre, but what's the truth behind it? And that's what people go, it sounds bizarre, and then they walk away.
And currently, man, there is so much we don't know.
Tons.
We think we know, but we have no idea. And the first step in actually the pursuit of knowledge, in my opinion, especially in science, is understanding that you don't know everything.
Yeah, it's extremely arrogant to think that we figured it all out.
Yeah, and I think the cryptozoology world brings a little bit of lightheartedness to it, right? Too, it's fun. In my opinion,
Agreed.
I see it in a fun manner. But I do think we shouldn't discount it. We shouldn't see it as a pseudoscience. And if we approach it in your manner, I think it's a viable way of new discoveries. Like you said, if we find out that Yeti, Yeti is actually a bear species, let's celebrate that as well.
How cool would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in itself, once again, how bizarre is an orangutan? How bizarre are the snub-nosed monkeys that look like little, like Star Wars creatures?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
There are so many primates out there that are bizarre looking. Black macaques, the golden langurs. You look at them, and if they didn't exist today, and all of a sudden someone discovered them, we'd be like, "Whoa, that's
what
a Bigfoot."
Happened?
That's a little Bigfoot.
Absolutely, yeah. And it does get people excited, and it does give people that like childlike sense of wonder. You know, I'm studying marine biology. I studied oysters. I love oysters. I'm fascinated by them. I recognize that most people are not going to be. So if I can get someone excited about a sea serpent and then throw in some cool oyster facts, like that's fun. That's really good to me. Getting excited about barnacles. You know, Charles Darwin's favorite and most studied animal was the barnacle. That's what he did most of his life's work on. He thought that he would be remembered as the barnacle guy. Like, that's what he was doing. That's what he was passionate about. And I love that. I think that that's so telling of the scientific mind of that, like, yeah, I had this one big discovery, but look at these barnacles. Look how cool this is.
Yeah, that's the niche aspect. I mean, that's where, you know, biologists, scientists are sometimes called nerds, I guess.
Sure,
but
proudly,
right.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I think nerds are celebrated even more, where with social media, niches are celebrated.
Absolutely.
Right? You could proudly be a barnacle expert.
Yeah.
Right? And be
and
celebrated
get a million
online
followers.
because you share that passion.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the most important element, I think, of science is the passion of understanding, the passion of loving that species, that concept, whatever that might be. Yeah.
One of my favorite random Darwin stories is, apocryphal, but one of his kids went over to one of their friends' houses, and as they were getting shown around the house, they said, "Well, where's your father's barnacle room?" Just assuming that everyone's got this.
There you go. Yeah.
That's what their family life was like. And I'm sure, you know, my kids see the bizarre stuff that my wife and I love to have around the house and the different animals that we're into. And I mean, I can remember my daughter having a similar experience where in her room we had a moth container that's 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide, and it was to raise all these really cool species of moth. And she'd go over to other people's houses and say like, "Well, where do you keep your bugs?" And they're like, "Outside."
Well, she's also named after a moth,
She
right?
is, yeah. So Luna is named after the moon and the night and all things mysterious and the absolutely beautiful Luna moth. And then my son is Wallace Charles, named after Alfred Russell Wallace, Charles Darwin, and Charles Fort. So.
Very appropriate. I mean, it's fun. It's fun, and I do think that we should promote cryptozoology in a more positive light. And in terms of what individuals believe, it's hard to discount as well someone's perception and what they consider a truth.
True.
Right? I'm not going to laugh at someone that's like, "Mario, I had this Bigfoot encounter and it shook me to the core."
Yeah.
We can't discount that.
No, not at all. And we shouldn't try. I mean, we should look at what are the facts behind this? What's the importance of this? Did it change your life in some positive way? Then great, then let's celebrate this.
Yeah.
If it changed your life in a negative way, then let's try to help with that. Let's try to see, you know, what we can do to make you feel better about being out there.
So in the world of cryptozoology, Bigfoot's a big one out there.
Sure.
Let me look at my shirt real quick.
Yeah, you've got Bigfoot, you've got the Chupacabra, you've got the Jersey Devil, Jackalope, aliens.
Let's talk about this one.
Aliens.
Are aliens in the realm of cryptozoology?
I don't think they are. I think aliens are a different form of study because it's really, really weird. So there's not really a folklore as much as there is, even as I'm saying
it's a tough
it,
one, right?
there is folklore.
Do I consider aliens cryptozoology? I mean, it's on my shirt.
Sure.
And this shirt says, Friends of Cryptozoology or whatever. I personally, I kind of seem a little separate to like a Bigfoot.
I do too.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is they're otherworldly by definition. You know, an alien being something from a different planet, I just feel that has some type of separation from things found on this planet.
However, there are lots of cultures out there, civilizations that did depict alien-like creature. Now, once again, my mind goes to like, let's define an alien, right? Just like I said, let's define a Bigfoot. To me, an alien is a being from outer space that is intelligent, right? So we think of the Greys, right? We think of the human-like alien that has the big heads and the, the big eyes and stuff like that, skinny arms. That's, to me, when I think of an alien, I think of that. However, as we know, and this is the fun part of things, who knows what an intelligent alien-like creature could look like in outer space.
Yeah, complete. I mean, so the evolution is a constant anywhere where life exists. Anywhere where there are, the proteins and amino acids, you kickstart the process of evolution. But that will look completely different on a planet that has a different chemical structure than our own.
Different gravitational pull.
Different gravitation, different forces that operate on that evolutionary behavior. I mean, we look at the deepest trenches of the ocean with the the thermal vents in the deepest part of the ocean. I mean, this is an area where they are surviving in hydrochloric they're surviving in sulfuric acid, and the temperature variation is 500 degrees from the top of one of the tube worms to the bottom of the tube worm. I mean, this is the most alien environment you can get, and the creatures that live there look it. They don't look like other things on Earth. So if that's any indication of the life that we might find in other planets, then we can kind of extrapolate and say, all right, then, we will see things that are completely outside of our realm of what we're used to.
From a physical, biological standpoint.
Yeah, I do think we have a lot of historical stories of aliens, in all different cultures, and we have modern day stories of alien encounters in all different cultures as well. There's something to that. What are people seeing? What are people encountering? I absolutely can't discount there being some type of interaction. I have not personally seen the evidence, once again, to convince me that this is happening, but I am very confident in saying there is more likely to be there's more likely to be life outside of Earth than not. The moon Titan of Saturn, we found water there. So where there's water, there is probably life. What it will look like, I mean, one theory that I love is carcinization, which is all things evolve to be a crab. So, I've heard of that, yeah. So what it would look like, I guess, is like a crab. So are we going to find crabs there? It's entirely possible. And I would be so pumped to find that and to find that alien species. There's also the theory of panspermia, where potentially we are aliens. We have evolved from microorganisms that existed elsewhere and that landed on Earth in some meteor, and that this has happened in countless other planets, anywhere in the habitable zone, habitable. Yeah, thank you. So any planet that exists in the habitable zone that has had an introduction of life as in the form of microorganisms, that will kickstart evolution on there, and then they'll evolve based on whatever the functions of that planet are. So I think as we have more space exploration and as we get better and better with telescopes, and we are almost certainly going to find life in our lifetime. And that's incredibly exciting to me.
Super exciting. Super exciting. I agree with a lot of your sentiments in that I've had no direct experience with an alien encounter, but based on the science of it, I would say the probability of intelligent life, or just life in general out there, is more probable to me than Bigfoot existing here in North America.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and that's utterly exciting to me. I mean,
yeah, it's a numbers game.
Yeah,
I mean that's the reality. Is it's a numbers game. You think about the number of star systems that are out there, the number of planets, the number of those in the zone where it could support life.
Wasn't it like the Goldilocks zone?
Yeah,
right?
The Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
How could there not be life out there? How can we be unique on this tiny little planet in a tiny little star in the vastness of space?
I love it. I love it. And admittedly, when I was younger, I was terrified of aliens, right? When I was younger, I remember a video came out, the alien autopsy.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? It was like this black and white footage of a very real-looking, like, humanoid alien on a table, and they were dissecting it. It looked like it was a crash victim.
Yeah.
And I was watching that with my dad. My dad loves aliens. He loves cryptozoology, and I was terrified. I was probably like maybe like 8 years old, and I was so scared of that I was doing this. I was just kind of like that alien culture, and like I then started to become interested in it.
Sure.
And now I'm not afraid of aliens. I'm more, fascinated and intrigued. But I think it's amazing that I think it's important that we're open, especially to extraterrestrial life, because once again, as you mentioned, I think there's more, statistically, there's more evidence that it exists than it doesn't.
I absolutely agree. And as far as us having documented evidence of, alien encounters and definitive proof of anything, one of my favorite personal stories is I was given the amazing opportunity to give a speech at NASA Ames a while back. And I got to give a talk in front of a room of, the hyperbolic smartest people in the world. It's not rocket science. This is a room full of rocket scientists that I was able to talk to.
Was that intimidating, by the way?
Oh, it was terrifying. Yeah, absolutely. I'm telling them like silly stories from travel, but they were an amazing audience and really, really fun. And I got a whole behind-the-scenes tour of NASA Ames, and I got half an hour with the director of NASA Ames, who at the time was this guy, Pete Ward. It was just an awesome guy, really interesting to talk to. And as I'm leaving, we had a great conversation. As I'm leaving, he goes, "Pat, you got any other questions for me? I will answer anything you've got." And I was like, I can't leave here. And I looked at him and I was like, "Dr. Ward, I can't leave here without asking the questions." And he goes, "Aliens?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, aliens." He's like, "I'm going to give you the saddest answer that you've ever had." He goes, "If I had evidence of aliens, I'd never have to beg Congress for my budget." And I was like, that's so disappointing.
Okay. But that doesn't mean that's current evidence.
Correct. Yeah. No, this was a while back, but also I just thought that, when it comes down to finances, that's the saddest, and unfortunately the Occam's razor, that's the most likely response there.
Gotcha.
And also that's one section of NASA Ames.
Sure.
So who knows what other organizations are doing.
There's probably the X-Files out there have more clearance than he does.
That's absolutely true.
Speaking of X-Files, I was fascinated by the series, and I really loved the series. Yeah. What was the catchphrase? Was I want to believe?
I want to believe. Yeah. That was what I did on Friday nights. That gives you a little insight into the Pat Spain's junior high and high school experience. Friday night was X-Files night.
Yeah. So we've spoken about Bigfoot. We just touched upon aliens. Of the cryptids that you've studied, are there some that you actually believe in, that you would be like, yeah, Mario, they exist?
Yeah, very much so. So I think that along with saying that there is more likely to be life outside of Earth than not, there are more likely to be large undiscovered creatures in the deepest part of the ocean than not. And some published papers have actually worked that out to be, the number that they came up with is 6. There are at least 6 large, meaning more than 6 feet long, creatures left to be discovered in the deepest parts of the ocean. Now, what those could be varies greatly. Is this, it's less likely to be a new species of pinniped than it is to be a new species of shark. It's less likely to be a new species of shark than it is to be a new species of cephalopod.
Gotcha.
So, but those are all relative likelihoods. But we can see that based on the findings over the last 200 years, there are still large animals left to be discovered in the deepest parts of the ocean. So that leads me to say the sea serpent mythos, there is something to that. Now, will it turn out to be a 60-foot long, snake-like creature? Probably not. but will it be a really, really unique and different looking shark? It could be. Will it be? I mean, there's only been like less than a dozen megamouth sharks seen, and they were discovered in the 70s, and that's the second largest it's third largest shark species in the world, second or third, it's up there. But there are new species of squid being discovered all the time. The giant squid, the colossal squid, the massive giant super squid.
Sure. And in cephalopods themselves, there's an alien aspect to them as well. I mean, they're as alien as can be for.
Yeah, I got to hold one this past week.
That's right.
Getting to hold that octopus. Yeah, they're little aliens. That was wild.
Pretty neat.
So I think there's definitely things left to find in the deepest parts of the ocean. Orang Pendek was compelling to the point where I am comfortable in saying if it's not still there, it was there very recently. And that's actually from Mike Morwood, who is the person who discovered and named Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, the little person of Indonesia, this hominid, Bigfoot-like creature that's supposedly very small. He discovered Homo floresiensis, which is a known and documented other species of human.
A described species by science.
Absolutely, that lived on the island of Flores. And he told me before he passed away that he had evidence. He said it's not enough to publish, but it's evidence that they were here until at least the 1920s.
Wow.
And I said, so Mike, do you think that there is a chance that small hominids still exist in Indonesia? And he goes, what are there, 1,700, 17,000 islands? Sure. Yeah. He goes, I see no reason to say that there isn't a chance that they're still out there today.
Crazy.
And to hear that from Dr. Morwood, who is the person who discovered this unique species and is one of the most well-respected people in his field, was really, really compelling. And to hear the stories of people who have seen them, and to also scientifically look at this and say the people who were telling us about this, they weren't looking for publicity, they weren't looking for any type of financial reward, and the things that they're telling me are like, oh, our grandparents saw a lot more of these than our parents did, and our parents saw more of them than we do. And they said, actually, my grandparents are the only people who ever saw young ones. My parents never saw a young one. I've only seen one, and it seemed older.
Wow.
It seems to me like this is a long-lived, remnant population that's currently going extinct. And that makes perfect biological sense to think that this is possible as their habitat has become more fragmented,
Sure.
as their forests, their environment has changed. So I do believe that if it's not still there, it was very, very recently. I think the Mapinguari is another one where in Brazil I went into this assuming that it was a great story and that it was going to be a really interesting exploration. And I left there thinking there's really something behind it because of I heard a call that nobody could identify, and I've worked with a lot of sloths, and this sounded like a low-pitched sloth call, which, if the Mapinguari is in fact a living giant ground sloth.
So that's what Mapinguari?
The Mapinguari, so if you talk to people in the cities, they'll describe it as this monstrous 20-foot tall creature with one eye and a mouth in the middle of its chest. But if you talk to people who live in the areas where it's been sighted, they describe it, and it sounds like a giant ground sloth. That one eye is the extremely elongated, strange face and the big nose on the end of it.
Yeah.
The mouth in the middle of its chest is the V-shaped marking on like a tamandua or something.
As well.
The scent glands,
Yeah.
yes, the stink. The stink of the Mapinguari is supposed to be so strong that it makes you pass out. Well, little stinkers. I mean, the tamandua is the little stinker of the forest, right?
And sloths as well.
Sloths as well, absolutely.
So giant ground sloth.
Giant ground sloth, yeah, related to anteaters. The giant anteater is there. So I do believe that the sightings of the Mapinguari could be a remnant population of giant ground sloth that's still there. And the indigenous peoples of the area that I was with told me, I believe it was the first time that it was recorded, their creation myth, their creation story. So this is a very long, so I'll try to make it more concise. So while I was down in Brazil, I participated in a ritual called the Tukundera, or bullet ant ceremony. It's one of the most extreme, if not the most extreme, indigenous ritual on Earth. And it involves getting stung hundreds of times on your hands by bullet ants. And people say, Pat, why did you do that? Was this a stunt? Is this? And it wasn't. It was to show respect to the tribes.
You weren't trying to get views on YouTube.
I was not trying to get views. I was doing this. I was doing this in order to gain the respect of the tribe, in order for them to see that I'm not there to exploit them. I'm worthy of hearing their truth. Not the stories that they tell to outsiders, not the things that are hidden, but to be accepted. I will never be a member of the tribe. I have not put in the time or the effort to be respected in that way, but I wanted them to see that I was not there to exploit them, I was not there to insult them, and I was willing to go to this extreme in order to hear the stories, and it worked. They told me their creation myth, and I believe it was the first time that that was recorded, where they said that all beings, all creatures on Earth come from the same material. We all come from clay, just like the cicada. The cicada emerges out of the clay, and that's what all beings have done. We're all made of the same thing. That's why we can all eat each other. That's why a jaguar can eat a person, and a person can eat an anteater, because we all come from the same, except the mapinguari. The mapinguari comes from this tree, and it's, you know, this red tree that's revered, and the mapinguari is other. It is separate from all other life, and it has to be treated with an immense amount of respect, to the point where the mapinguari is the wildness of the forest and the protector of the forest. And if you see a mapinguari or hear the call of a mapinguari, your entire tribe has to move out of the area until you're no longer within earshot of this. So we're talking about the tribes that I was living with were protected. I had to have, you know, months of health screens, and I had to get special permission, and which is great, and I believe that that is the correct thing to do. But go a little bit further, and there are uncontacted tribes, tribes where Westerners are not allowed to go into this region. So that's already a nature preserve. But if they themselves are creating nature preserves by leaving that area where they've heard this call and never going back, and giant ground sloths were wiped out by hunting. They were one of the first species to go extinct from human over-hunting. And you've got this entire region of people where their creation mythos is to leave these animals alone, and you create a natural nature preserve for them, you've got the chance that they're still there.
Sure. And large animals have slow reproductive rates.
Yes.
They tend to live a long time. Fascinating. If you had unlimited resources to, hey, Pat, I want you to go on an expedition. You've got all the money. What cryptid would you search for?
I believe that there are two answers to that. So the real answer is, with unlimited resources, I would be James Cameron.
Okay, going down.
I would be out on a boat and down at the deepest parts of the ocean as much as I possibly could. My family, I would have to convince my wife and our kids to live on a boat, and that's what we would be doing, is deep sea exploration. I think the chances of finding a cryptid are pretty small in the deep ocean, but I'm so fascinated by that environment that that's what I would do, and I would hopefully discover all kinds of crazy new species. Where I think we are the most likely to find one of the classic cryptids is orang pendek. Is in Indonesia. I would really do a very, very in-depth exploration involving thousands of camera traps and hundreds of local guides of setting camera traps over the course of a decade in multiple islands all around Indonesia to find orang pendek, because I believe that when we say orang pendek, it's probably representative of 2, maybe 3 different species, some being more gibbon-like, some being more human-like. But I do really think that if they're not there, they were very, very recently, and that with unlimited resources, we could find something there.
Interesting. Potential remains or
something alive.
You heard it here first. If you have unlimited resources and want to sponsor an expedition for Pat, that's what we're going to search for. The
orang pendek.
Orang pendek. And where can people learn more about orang pendek? You you did write about it in one of your
books.
books.
I wrote a book about orang pendek.
Let's talk about your books.
Oh, thank you very much. So this is one of them. I have a 6-book series that's all about my adventures all over the world, and they are each one is a collection of short stories. It's intended to be, you can read one, put it down for a little while, read another. If you got a buddy who's traveling to one of these places, you can give them the book to read on the plane. They are all very, very lighthearted. For all the kids watching, there is some language in them, I'll say. So, read them with that in mind. But I'm really proud of these. I had a great time writing them and kind of reliving my experiences. They are all true stories, and each one is a collection of travel stories with one chapter about a unique cryptid.
They're fun. They're fun.
Thank you.
This one that I've read, lots of information. He talks about his bullet ant challenge. Which has nothing on that Coyote Peterson guy, let me say
no,
that.
That's not true. Coyotes was awesome.
So pretty cool. Pat, there's so much more that we could get into and talk to. I've had the privilege of meeting Pat. So this is our second time that we've met.
Yeah.
We've gone on 2 productions, and the first time we drove a lot, and you were telling us your stories, and I felt like I was just in a real life podcast. Like I was driving, I'm just listening to these fascinating stories. So a lot more to talk about. So we'll certainly get you back on to Global Guardians.
Awesome.
But thank you for this first introduction into the world of cryptozoology.
Thank you. Really had a great time.
And as usual, you can find all the relevant links in the description below, including where you can find Pat's amazing series of books. Also, where can we find you on social media?
So patspain.com, and I'm pretty active on Instagram under patspain.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you, Pat, for being
Thank you.
part of Global Guardians. I can't wait to get out in the field with you again. Maybe we'll find some cryptids.
Awesome. That would be great.
Do you believe?
I want to believe.